Okay, so we'll do some intros, just as a few more people trickle in. I'm Victoria Littler, I'm Senior Account Director at TSR. I've been in my role now for 18 months, and in that time, the great privilege to work with many universities, brands, charities, and accommodation providers to help them to better understand students, to attract them and to engage with them. Before TSR, I was at another three-letter acronym NUS, where I led on brand partnerships for the student discount card NUS Extra, then Totem, which helped students to save money on the things that they need, whilst generating much needed income for students' unions. I'd say at this point I've still visited more SUs than university spaces, but the numbers are getting close now. I could tell you lots about the Universities of Leicester and Liverpool after visiting them and having the best tours from the best people. And yes, I am buttering you both up as a thanks for being on the panel. Elliot, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Elliot. I'm the head of UK Student Recruitment and Outreach at the University of Leicester. So my team works with students as young as primary school all the way through to pre-16 and post-16, as well as postgraduate students in the UK. So kind of a full spectrum of work that we do with prospective students. I've been at the university for 9.5 years, and in this role specifically for about 3 years. But no, it's great to be here and talk about this topic. I also work closely with Johnny, who'll be teeing up after this, within HELOA as well, the Higher Education Liaison Officers Association, and I specifically look after our relationships with UCAS and Finder University.
Great, thanks, Elliot. Johnny?
Morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's Johnny Atkinson. I'm currently the Hybrid Delivery Manager at the University of Liverpool, and if you're curious to know what that is, so am I. It's a role which has emerged from the pandemic and all of our digital events, and we couldn't let go of all the great stuff that we developed. And I've been lucky enough to be able to continue on some of that great work, and now we're integrating it into the student journey through comms, CRM, and our on-campus events as well, to make sure that we can just sort of make the best of everything, and really just try and communicate with students, so the role really ties in nicely with what we're talking about today, because my role is trying to sustain that sense of belonging rather than these individual events and then you lose everything that connects them. I'm also the chair of HELOA, so our organisation basically works to empower and improve our members' knowledge and ability to support students in their higher education choices. And we are well connected, and I'm sure many of you who are on the call today will be familiar with us, but we've got over 152 institutions and 1,750 members at the last count, so it's a really fantastic network to be part of. And yeah, it's great to be here with you guys to chat all things students today.
Thanks, Johnny. Mari, do you mind giving us a little bit of an intro to yourself?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mari, and I'm the head of Student Voice and Diversity at the Student Room. My background is in secondary education, so I used to be a secondary school teacher and a head of year, and then I came into the world of the Student Room about 5.5 years ago. And in my role, I think that I am just the luckiest person around, because I get to be with students all the time on the site, and I also look after our student advisory board. So I'm speaking to students all the time, hearing kind of the things that they are thinking about, asking questions about, worrying about, and kind of working to make sure that we're able to share what those worries are with people like yourselves here today, because I really do think that it's when we work together that we can support students the best. So that's sort of what a lot of my role focuses around, is really kind of collating everything that we're learning from students on the Student Room and putting it in the hands of people who are in the best position to make a difference. So I'm really happy to be here talking about belonging today, because I think it's just such an incredibly important topic. I also have a wonderful relationship with our friends over at Student Minds, and our colleague over there, Nicola Frampton, has shared with us some really important learnings and knowledge that she would love to kind of share with this room of people today as well. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to be sort of representing for Nicola from Student Minds as well, and sharing some of her expertise via some wonderful resources that she sent over. So yes, I'll be wearing two hats a little bit today.
Amazing, thanks, Mari. What a great panel, and an absolute treat to spend some time with you this morning. Okay, so intro's over, and it's been just over a month since students received their exam results. And for a lot of us, that is a time that can be often taken over and become somewhat tunnel visioned by numbers, by targets, and even call centre shifts. And whilst bums on seats are important, what is increasingly important is the understanding that for students to thrive academically within their institution, they need to feel as though they truly belong. Belonging is posited as the key variable in whether students persist with their studies and are successful in the higher education academy's What Works student retention and success programme. So this sense of belonging that we're talking about today is strongly associated with both academic and social engagement while at university. Before I ask our panellists some questions to understand their approach to this topic, I wanted to kick us off with the words of Mary Cook. And she's right. Many of you are clearly thinking hard about how to foster this sense of belonging. Hopefully, that's why you're here. But it isn't as though we're just suddenly bringing this to your attention. Over the last decade, there has been a great deal of progress in better understanding the higher education experiences of different student groups, particularly those from marginalised, minoritised or less advantaged backgrounds. There's also been an increasing focus on mental health and wellbeing across higher education, which we know has a massive impact on a student's potential to succeed. And then, as all of this good work was going on, we had a global pandemic well and truly pull the rug out from under us. These questions about belonging became more urgent as the experience of disconnection, disengagement, and loss of academic confidence became much more widespread. The sector saw enormous levels of innovation in the delivery of online learning, teaching, and student services. And these experiences were a function of rolling lockdowns, societal uncertainty, and personal loss and grief, which has produced a particular set of outcomes in the education context. This quote from Mary is taken from a September 2021 report called Turbocharging the Future, written for the Up Foundation Student Futures Commission. The purpose was to recognise the disruption that the pandemic caused to university life and to pool the sector's insight on what students would need in the years ahead to enable their future success. The report shows that the pandemic had an impact on students' confidence, engagement, mental health, and that students from poorer backgrounds and non-traditional students had suffered the worst effects, and that belonging was now a focal point for universities' future plans. So, whilst my guests and I can't possibly claim to have all the answers to solve the crisis that Mary refers to here, I hope we'll be able to provide you with enough food for thought from what we think based on our experiences with students, but also including some really helpful guidance from key charity partners too. We asked the Samaritans, what is a sense of belonging? For us to think about ways to create it, we first need to understand what it actually is. As everyone here today well and truly knows, students are not a homogenous group, and treating them as such would be the first hurdle that we would all fall over on. Belonging means different things to different students, and it will matter greatly to some and much less to others, depending on how their own personal circumstances and how they feel. Creating a sense of belonging is important because it can help to tackle feelings of loneliness, which we know are particularly common amongst the student population, even before the pandemic. We asked our friends at Student Minds for their thoughts on this subject, and what their data clearly shows here is a rise in loneliness, spiking understandably during the pandemic. But even as recently as July 2022, their research shows that students had felt lonely in the month prior to the survey, and that this loneliness was impacting their mental health. The student room is home to millions of conversations between students every year, so we hear a lot from different types of students talking about their experiences. And for a large percentage of our audience, the need to belong matters a lot. I've pasted a few snippets of these conversations on the next few slides for you, so you can read from the students themselves just how they're feeling and what they're concerned about. There is a lot about homesickness, as you might expect, as well as students worrying that they won't have anything in common with people they meet on their course, a lack of shared interests outside of the course itself. Freshers Weeks are happening up and down the country right now, and for some students, that is a hugely exciting, adventurous time where they can have new experiences and they can make friends which can last a lifetime. And for others, it's just not so straightforward. The expectation to drink during freshers looms heavy still, and students who do not consume alcohol or consider themselves big party goers, as this poster at the bottom here describes, then they can find themselves struggling to fit in. Okay, so you've heard a little bit from Mary Kane Cook, the Samaritans, Student Minds, our student audience at TSR, and you've heard far too much from me. So let's turn to our wonderful panelists to hear their thoughts. So hopefully, if I stop sharing my screen now, you can just see faces. Yeah, good. All right, lovely. So let's just dive in. Why do you think creating a sense of belonging is so important? Elliot, I'm going to come to you first.
That's a good question. I think a lot of it almost boils back down to some of the things that we as universities, I guess, try and showcase at major events such as open days or offer holidays or anything where students are on campus. Really is that sense of the kind of being friendly, being pretty nice, being welcoming, and hopefully that having a resonance with the student and also their parents, guardians, whoever they're attending with, to make them think actually that's an atmosphere I can see myself studying in for 3, 4, 5 years. I think that's never really gone away, but it's something that obviously was slightly trickier to provide, I suppose, online. I think with particularly looking back to 2020 and 2021, it felt very individual for a lot of people. Kind of sat at home in front of varying screens, not being able to see anyone. So actually have it and getting any sense of belonging there is always going to be hard. So now being able to have more of an option or have more alternatives to kind of provide that sense of community, I think from our side as universities is really important and something that it's probably talked about more now than it was back in 2019, 2020. I know we do a lot more work at Leicester on kind of the transition piece and looking at bringing that earlier in the cycle. And it's something we kind of did before, but was all a bit cobbled together, whereas now it feels a lot more coherent and planned and actually makes sense and is looking to address a particular problem.
Yeah, thanks for that, Elliot. It's really interesting to hear that you're thinking about it more longer term now. That is definitely something that came from what the Samaritans shared with us as well. It's, you know, that transition period is crucial, but also making sure that it's just an always on focus rather than a shorter term thing. So yeah, thank you. Johnny, what about you? Why do you think belonging is so important?
I'm in a really privileged position this year because my niece is starting university, and she's in a really similar situation that I was in the fact that she's staying at home, going to a local university. And even though you think that would make it easier to belong, sometimes it also throws you into a really foreign environment. And what's really funny is the same things that she's thinking, I had a chat with her at the weekend, they're the same things that I felt, but this time round, there's so much better information and there are specific things created for local students. And it's just really nice to see that although the sort of trepidation, that's like the nervousness is the same as it has been for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, the approach is changing. For me, university is just this massive melting pot of people. It is absolutely amazing. It's so exciting. You know, you're going to grow and change too when you get to university as well. So it's not like one thing will fit you all of the time. But I think that sense of belonging brings with it a sense of like groundedness, and it helps. Is groundedness a word? Grounding. But yeah, it's basically that sense of belonging is like a magnet. All these things go out all over the place, but you can always come back to one thing. And I think for me, it's that just a community. The university is responsible for creating that community environment, that it's not tied to one individual or one place. It's just that you feel okay being in that environment. So yeah, that's what we need to do, is connect people and keep changing, I think, as well. Like don't just stick to one thing and think that works for everybody. Make sure that it adapts as you're going through your sort of journey.
Definitely, and that's such an interesting point about how people change themselves, don't they? So it's not even just keeping a continuous focus on belonging to different student groups, but even within those student groups as well, those people will change massively throughout their time, from what's important to them and how they feel as a fresher versus what's important to them and how they feel when they're ready to graduate. And yeah, keeping them connected throughout all of those changes in their personal lives is quite a feat. Mari, why do you think the concept of belonging matters so much to students?
Yeah, really good question. And I feel like Elliot and Johnny's points so far kind of speak to that a little bit already. But I think, we all have a desire to belong, don't we? I think it's a really human trait to have, and in fact it's incredibly important for our mental health. It's a really important resilience building factor for us to feel like we belong. But it's interesting, this identity forming point as well. I was listening to a podcast a while ago which was talking about that belonging often gets conflated with fitting in, but actually it's totally not that. And it's interesting kind of what Student Minds and Samaritans have said as well. But if someone feels like they belong, they feel like they can truly be themselves and they don't have to change to fit in, which is something I'm not sure I learned that until I was a proper grown-up, but it's a really interesting lens, I think, to look at it, because it means that I think for students it's not just about kind of making friends and meeting people, although that's incredibly important, but forming, university is really key identity forming time for students as well. And it's easy to say, it's important to feel like you belong, but if you don't really feel that you have a strong sense of self when you get to university, it might be hard to know whether you're feeling like you belong with this group of people or that group of people. So I think there's kind of two parts to belonging for students. Yes, there's the social interactions and the social connections, which are so important, but discovery of their own selves, I think, is also a really incredibly important part of that. It's interesting, I was speaking with one of our student advisory board members last year. She was in year 12 at the time, and she was already talking about how excited she was to go to university, specifically because of the people that she would meet. And she was so excited that she was going to meet these people who are gonna change her life. Like, they're going to be her friends forever. It's going to be, she is so excited to see the person that she will be because of those people. Like, that was maybe more important, I think, than the academic side of things. And it's interesting that that's sort of how she felt in year 12. So it's incredibly important. And Nicola from Student Minds said a really interesting thing about its belonging is a sense of feeling that they are where they're supposed to be, and an absence of imposter syndrome, which I think is a really interesting way to think about it as well. So yeah, I think broadly there's the two parts. It's kind of those social connections, but also the self-discovery point is a really important part of belonging for students.
And your point about whether a person has a strong sense of self before they start university is a really interesting one, because we saw that in the snippets of some of the conversations that we shared on some of those earlier slides, where the students that don't have hobbies or particular passions already by the time they go to university, how do they discover what they are? If somebody is already on the netball team, they can quite easily, you would hope, think, okay, I can join a netball team at university. I can find people that are interested in the same things that I am. But if they don't already have that, that's an extra kind of layer of challenge for them, isn't it? What else have you seen from students on TSR, Mari, that kind of speaks to that need to belong? We've seen some snippets of conversations, but what else have you seen?
Yeah, good question. We see it coming up every year, to be honest, questions and comments and conversation about what we would term sense of belonging. Students don't usually call it that or use that sort of language, but what we would term as kind of a sense of belonging, it does come up every year, but it's interesting to see sort of how it's changed kind of over the past couple of years and into now. But this year, back at the beginning of June, we asked those students who would be starting university around now what they're most apprehensive about when they're thinking about starting university, and by far the biggest concern was making friends. Like, they only got to choose one option, and 45% of them chose making friends as their biggest concern. And The second most common concern got less than half those votes, with 19% of the votes, and that was doing well on my course. So then more than double the number of students were concerned about making friends at university. So we know that a sense of belonging is really important to students as they come into university, but we also know from that sort of poll that there's concern about students' level of, their confidence level, I suppose, about their ability to make those important social connections. And this is an interesting one, but I think it's really important. A month ago, students who were about to start university told us that the thing they most need help with is life skills when they're getting prepared to start university. And I've had this conversation with a few people now. Elliot, we were talking about the other day about how important actually life skills can be in terms of being able to foster things like a sense of belonging. It can be really alienating for students if they don't feel like they have the basic skills that they might need. Skills are practical, but they are often also keys to social doors. You know, your ability to feel confident in the kitchen, for example, where your housemates might be. That might be where you end up, you know, you frequently see them. Those constant interactions, small interactions, are the things that can lead to friendships. And if you're not feeling like you can be part of that kind of exclusion, I suppose, that you might feel can also be really challenging, I think, for students. And it was interesting, in the same thread, we asked current university students, or those who'd already been to university, what advice they would give to freshers, and kind of agnostic of the poll results. Almost all of them focused on social advice that they would give freshers, kind of without any other guidance. Things like joining a society, go to freshers events and introduce yourself. This was a really interesting one and broke my heart a little bit, but it's a really good point. Find a society or activity to do on Sundays, because weekends can be when you feel the most homesick. And I just had a look today at the forums over the past 24 hours, and this is just from our Uni Life forum, and there's conversations everywhere with, you know, students are just moving into their accommodation. This is a really key time for us to be discussing this topic, because it's so front and center for students. And I want to read, I hope it's all right, I want to read some of these out, because I just think that they're a really, really good example of the nuance that some of these, or that every student will be experiencing in kind of different ways. One student was saying that they moved to uni last Sunday, spent the whole time crying, and wanting to come home. They ended up speaking to disability services and deciding to take a year out. They said they have anxiety and depression, and they're autistic, and they're now feeling like they didn't make the right decision going to take a gap year. So there's some students already who have kind of struggled and decided to come home, but also it's a really tough decision to do that. But great that they were able to get the support there from the disability services at the university. Another student said, I know it's too early to tell whether I like this uni experience, but I'm just thinking about all the problems that might occur, like being restricted by money. They said they can't go home when they want because train tickets are too expensive, or not enough diversity. They said there's no Afro hair shops or Afro-Caribbean food shops around me. So there's these bits and pieces that they're starting to notice and starting to worry about. Another student said that they're due to start uni today, and they're a mature student, and they're going to be commuting, so they're not going to be staying near the campus, and they're really nervous about not fitting in. Like, this is not just a school leavers, I'm going to say problem. It's not a school leavers challenge only. Someone else said I made a couple of friends, but they've only been at uni a couple of days, and they're already feeling disheartened because other people already have like a proper group of friends, it seems to them. Another student said, I have a worry about cooking at uni. Do your flatmates already know how to cook when you get into uni? And do other people watch you when you cook? What if they laugh at you when something goes wrong and you just embarrass yourself in front of them? Like, it's the life skills thing, it comes up again and again. And then lastly, this person said they're 20 years old and they have no friends. They've joined societies, they've tried making friends on their course. They've been at uni for a few years now. And they've said they've always eaten lunch alone. do I try to make friends in my final year, or do I just graduate without having any friends? Like, this isn't just a challenge for those students who are coming into university now. We see a lot about that. But it's something that came up in the Student Futures Commission as well, around the idea that it's not just first year students who need support in terms of belonging, and in terms of having those important social connections. And I know that those are some big examples, but I think it's important to hear from students what they're actually asking about. And I do feel hopeful because we're in this webinar and we're talking about it. So that's the good part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those examples, Mari, because what that does is show just the breadth of the issue and how complex it really is. You know, there isn't any one of those examples where you could quite easily kind of, you know, do one thing and it would fix it, because it really wouldn't. I also thank you for sharing some of those. As hard as that is to listen to, sometimes you're absolutely right. We need to be listening, and we need to make sure that we've got the student voice at the heart of these kinds of conversations that we're having. Thank you. So we've talked, you know, a little bit around how this isn't a new conversation, but it has changed a little bit over the past few years. Johnny, question for you. How have you seen the desire to belong change throughout the pandemic? What do you think is the biggest thing that has changed as a result?
It's a good one. I think we're all used to just kind of, we were pre-pandemic really used to a cycle, especially inside universities, like same things, same year, what you know, template has changed, or what hashtag are we using this year. We were being innovative, but no more so than when the pandemic hit and we had to be innovative and adapt to change. And I do think there's a sense of just understanding how much can be done. You know, we've removed a lot of barriers in terms of how people think from the pandemic. Not that I'd ever want to repeat the pandemic, but the key learning from the pandemic is things are hard, but there's also the opportunity to react to the challenge, rise to the challenge. And I still think there's a spirit of that going around universities. And we were at the Heist Awards or the What Uni Awards, and I've never seen such amazing examples of what people can achieve. And indeed through Helloa, you know, we have our own awards, and the collaboration, you know, the willingness to share how I'm doing this, can you do it better? And I think that's great. So from a university perspective, in terms of what's changed, it's really good that people are basically ready to step up to different challenges, and come up with great ideas about how to handle them. I think in terms of my understanding of what we need to do is, there's been a lot, like a stopgap in terms of like the influences. So, you know, you might have had a brother who was 1 or 2 years older, or you might have had friends in sixth form who were the year above you, who were really key influences in terms of what you can set expectations for. And we've lost that, because even though you might know people who've gone to university, their university experience even last year is going to be completely different to what your university experience is like this year and all of the years before, because universities themselves have adapted and now do things differently. So for me, the key really is in the title of my job. It's hybrid and it's engagement. So hybrid, just so everybody is on board, is not about delivering something live and online at the same time. For me, hybrid is reacting to what's the best situation to keep people engaged. So how are you really using your comms plan to join everything together? When are you doing your activities? Are you doing the same thing that you've always done? Or where's the opportunity to actually keep that student engaged? We've got so many different teams, and I think I'm skipping to a question that might come way further down the line, but we've got so many teams working on so many fantastic projects together. But if they're not connected, and if they're not working in collaboration with each other, we're actually just sending lots and lots of messages out to students. And one of the things I hear back is, you're sending me too much stuff, and that's potentially from one university, never mind several universities they're interested in. So it's about just having a really clear path and looking at all of the different options. And before we even start to send stuff out to students, have that conversation internally and say, right, what is it that we want to say, and how can we say this in the best way possible? So it's to make sure students do feel yeah, it's a connection for me. Like, sense of belonging is just having a connection which isn't tied to another person. It's you tied into that place. You know, you feel yourself there. I think what Mary was saying before is spot on. It's that independence, isn't it? You've got an autonomy, and you've also got a sense of your own self in a place, which I think is really, really important and does take a little while to develop. So yeah, the first couple of weeks are always tough, aren't they?
Absolutely, thanks, Johnny. And I think it's difficult, isn't it, to find that balance between communicating with students, prospective applicants or current students that you have at your university, and also kind of bombarding or overwhelming them with too many messages. It must be difficult to kind of find that balance. Elliot, what would you say around the changes that you've seen most since the pandemic?
I think one of the things that we've not really covered just yet is the kind of almost like academically feeling belonging at university. And I think one thing we are all probably guilty of at universities, if we think back to 2019 and previously, is almost the expectation that students will be able to cope and they'll just be fine as they kind of go through the course, particularly in the first year. I don't think there was that much effort, if we're all honest about it, that much effort made to make sure that students actually were coping or were able to kind of understand where everything is when they particularly when they start university. And I think if we go back to when we all pivoted online, a lot of the expectation was that actually students will probably be okay because they're quite digital, aren't they? They live on their phones. They like being online. It's like, well, yes, they kind of do, but this is very, very different. So one of the main things I think we've seen, particularly at Leicester, I think speaking to other colleagues, is a real shift in focus in ensuring, from a university point of view and a transition point of view, that actually digitally we're supporting as well, not just putting on lots of activities that help with the kind of more social side of things, but also we've created a specific Blackboard module for when they arrive in terms of almost like a starter pack, I suppose, of resources, so they actually are able to understand how they use the lecture capture system and how if we do any Teams teaching, how that's going to be, or how they can complement the face-to-face teaching with some digital support. So rather than oh yeah, it's just a load of stuff, go find it yourself. So I think there's probably slight more of a hand-holding operation there, which I think is a good thing. Is there for the right reasons. But it goes back to the kind of belonging question of actually that could be one of the key reasons why students feel like actually I can't be me at this university because I feel less confident in my work because I don't necessarily understand how the university is trying to academically get their messages and their teaching across to me as well. So alongside all the changes that we've kind of spoken about as well, I think that's something to bear in mind moving forward as well. Even in the world of most universities back in predominantly face-to-face teaching, I think it's still something we can learn and actually help students if they feel like they're not maybe but don't feel a sense of belonging from the making friends side of things. Actually, there is still the academic side of things that we can support with too.
Absolutely. And the assumption that students have all of the access to all of the devices and have the digital skills to use them effectively is a problem. I remember reading a really good initiative that one university had set up very early in the pandemic, which was to gift laptops to students that needed them. But then they didn't have Wi-Fi access at home. So they then gifted SIM cards with data on. But it showed that actually like fewer than half of the students that were gifted these laptops and the SIM cards to access the internet actually did that. Fewer than half were able to connect them up and use them. So, simply giving devices does definitely not fix the challenge there. But it's good that we're talking about, kind of pivot to digital and hybrid and how we've all had to make big adjustments to the world now. We're all virtually in a room together. Johnny, you mentioned in our intros that your role is completely new as a result of the changes over the past few years. How have you handled that change or that pivot to digital and hybrid delivery?
I'm not, as a hello hat on, I'm usually used to talk about 152 of us collectively, so I don't usually brag about Liverpool that much, but this one time I'm going to do it because resources are tight, and you've got to have a really good reason for doing something. And what I'm particularly pleased about, not just personally, but it's more of a concept, is that Liverpool have invested in hybrid in terms of, it's an idea. This is going to be a project role to see what works. So what has worked really well, how do we make it even better, and how do we make it complement? And the way that I like to explain this is basically, it's a little bit of a story, but hybrid and online and digital and everything, it's not going to ever replace coming onto campus and connecting with something and having that experience. You're just not going to be able to replace it, because it's the best. So everybody should go to the universities that they're interested in, but like we've heard, it's expensive, it's hard. You need a way of basically sussing out who's worth that investment and time. So I think it's like getting 5 birthday party invitations, and you can check out what that itinerary is, what they're promising you, how good does that invitation look. And actually that invite is from the open day, that person is open day. They've sent you that invite, and that's the main reason that you would go, is I can't wait. But that one person at a party that you meet does not make the party. That one person you might see and spend 2 minutes with because they're who you came to see. But everybody else who's there, which is for me, the comms, the on-demand, the online interactions, the live Q&As, the uni buddies, that builds up the party. That leaves you with the impression of, I've had a great time or I've had a terrible time. Both are great answers. You go to a party and had a rubbish time, don't go back. But if you had a really, really good time, then go on and, enjoying that. So I think for me, if you think about hybrid engagement, it's about creating the party. It's about having fun. It's about connecting with people in many different ways and giving them the right information before we get there, giving them the fantastic experience while they're out there, and then afterwards, all the connections and all of the information that they can go back to. But the experience is that one thing that you're focusing on, but the memories are created by everything around it.
I love that as an example, Johnny. And given that you kind of preface that with, I'm gonna spend some time showing off about Liverpool, I've kind of got this image in my head of like really good party bags to everybody who comes to Liverpool, and like really good cake, not just icing and sponge. Like, I think that's kind of what you're promising students, isn't it? I think that's what I heard.
I think catering depends on which department you add to, but if you come and see me, I'll get you some cake. Yeah,
good. Amazing. All right, cool. So yeah, we asked a couple, we asked registrants if they had any questions in particular that they would like to ask the three of you, and quite a few that came in advance of the session this morning were around how can we create opportunities for students to connect with each other and promote them, but really holding on to a sense that these are genuine opportunities to connect and really avoid looking performative or inauthentic. So that was a question that came in quite a few times. Mari, what do you think about that?
It's such a good question, and I feel like the number of people who have asked it it's a really positive thing, because it means we're thinking about how do we do things that really genuinely help rather than just look like they're helping. So yeah, great question. Nicola from Student Minds and I completely agree about my first thought on this, which is be student led. They are the experts. The students are the experts. They're experiencing it. And just learn from them at every opportunity throughout their university journey, not just, before they come and not when they've just arrived. Learn from them all the time, because it will be, I often find when we speak to students, their ability to reflect on things is really, really important. So definitely learn from students is my first suggestion. Secondly, if you're able to, and this is so much easier said than done, and I know like every institution who I ever speak to is working as hard as possible to manage resource, but really, like, we heard from a lot of students what it is they're experiencing when it comes to finding that sense of belonging, and we know how important it is for not just them but also for universities to retain students. So if you're able to put focus and resource into helping students belong throughout the year and throughout their course, not just in the first year, then that's important. And pay attention to the little things. I really do think that strong connections can be built from small but consistent interactions. And I keep coming back to this, you know, cooking in the kitchen analogy, but there's a million different examples of small ways to kind of foster that sense of community and reinforce it. And I would also say, if it's possible, and I don't honestly know the best way to go about doing this, but if it's possible, address this stigma of loneliness. I think I was reading through those comments from students earlier, and I was thinking that there's all these students sitting on their own in their rooms, feeling like they're the only person who hasn't immediately found their friends, or, you know, or hasn't found their friends after a long time. And we know that that's not true, because we see how many people are talking about it. But I think for a lot of students in that moment, there's a misconception that everyone else is doing great except for them. We know that isn't true, and I don't know how we go about removing that myth. But yeah, I think if anyone's got ideas on that, I think that could be a really powerful thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you and I have had conversations before around that sense, you know, kind of sticks with you even into adulthood sometimes. And as a grown-up, you can often think, everyone else just knows what they're doing, and they've got it together, and I just, yeah, muddle through the day. So yeah, if that's something that affects us as grown-ups, it for sure is difficult for students. What you were saying around the small things as well, that came through in some of the sort of guidance and advice from Samaritans, and I think definitely that is such a good way to avoid looking performative as well, because, you know, if there are big events happening and then nothing else throughout a student's experience at university, that is a big way of making that student feel like you did a big thing and then you ignored me forever, and having those small things consistently. Elliot, you talked earlier around Leicester having much more of a focus on the long term for students as well. What do you think about the issue of avoiding looking inauthentic?
I think one of the things that we've done over the last 6-7 months or so is create an opportunity for students, particularly our firm offer holders for this year, to join a community space. So we used the Unibuddy community function for that, and essentially grouped them together in one big community space, and set some topics that they could talk about, or just have some threads that were titled various broad things rather than course specific things. And by far and away the most popular of that was life, the universe, and everything. It was just a space for them to get together and chat about stuff. We thought essentially it was just a place where they could get together and share Snapchat handles and Insta handles, so they can go off and form their own groups out of nosy eyes of universities, which, to be honest, I think is absolutely fine. If that's helping them feel more of a community in their own social channels than being in a kind of university branded space, then that is, our job is almost done there. We've created a kind of online meeting point, I suppose. So we're looking at using the insight we're going to gather from that and working out if we can do that within other spheres of our work. So we have students on progression programs, so kind of 2-year programs. Could we look at similar kind of products there, or how do we take the insight that we've gained from this? But also, I mean, and this is a bit of a clang for you guys, but we use your student sentiment update a lot to support our work in terms of understanding how do we use the kind of niches that we have at Leicester, or the platforms we have at Leicester, to help shape what we do. And other universities on the call, you'll all have your different ways of doing things, you'll all have your different platforms that you use. I would really strongly advise, if you don't already, I imagine you do because you're here today, but if you don't already, use that kind of update to help think about what you then go on to do. It's been really advantageous for us, and I absolutely agree with Mari. Make it student-led. Within that community space, we didn't have any of our students in there. It's just that the students peer-to-peer. It was peer-to-peer. That prospective students talking to prospective students. So, and that seemed to work really well. So I would absolutely advocate that, and it's one of the ways we're looking at moving forward, I think, is actually just how do we connect them slightly earlier, even if they aren't an applicant to the university. How do we connect them together, maybe with our students every so often, but actually most of the time just with themselves.
Thanks, Elliot. And thinking about connecting potential applicants together, and remembering what we've been saying throughout this conversation this morning about all the different kinds of student groups that you'll interact with as a university. Is there additional challenge, you think, to ensure that typically underserved groups of students feel welcome at their university? So student parents, January starters? Is there an additional challenge there? Johnny, what do you think?
Yeah, I think as communities grow, there's definitely been those groups that have slipped under the radar, and from what Mari was saying before as well, that if it's not immediately obvious that there is something for you, then you think that everything isn't for you, because it's always aimed at get to know your city, and it's like, well, I know the city, I don't need that kind of thing. Liverpool's got a really good welcome program, so it ties in quite nicely with introducing lots of things that will be there throughout your journey. So we talk about the Liverpool Welcome, which is a modular system similar to Blackboard, it's on our Canvas system. So for our international students, there's 3 key seminars before they even come, and it's all about how to arrive here and what you do, and then setting bank accounts up, or understanding what the currency is like, or what the local shops, where are the Chinese supermarkets, where is the Afro-Caribbean area, because there are going to be pockets in different cities, so it's not like they don't exist, but you sometimes have to go and find them because it's a new community for you. So there's those really specific sessions, and they're you call it sort of your pre-departure sessions that we have, which is really nice. And then for actually connecting with the city, I think there's lots of things that you can do, but the first thing is identify your groups and then connect with them. So we mentioned my niece earlier before, so if she's going to specific sessions in Northumbria to connect with those students, we do exactly the same thing ourselves. Or you're a local student, come and meet other local students. You're a mature student or you're a disabled student, 2 days last week, so before everything kicks off and it all becomes very overwhelming for everybody, those groups were identified. They said, actually, you might be able to come along earlier, and if you do, get that little sense of belonging and kickstart it before you have to share it with everybody else. And I think that's the thing, it's just about being conscious, using the insight, but actually doing something with that. I think a lot of us are guilty of reading lots of stuff and going, that's a great idea, but then with all of our demands and our time, putting it into action. And sometimes as well, my plea is that I see and read a lot, but I'm not going to be able to do everything. So share what you find, use the opportunity in meetings just to plant the seed, because it might be that some other team or some other project can take what you know, but without that conversation, it might not have it's raising awareness through the insight and the data, and then doing something about it, really. Yeah.
Definitely, thank you for that. And it gets even more complicated, doesn't it, when you think about all these different groups of students and then the differences within those groups as well. So if we think about international students, for example, and there's lots being done to across the sector to welcome international students onto campuses, but international students aren't a homogenous group either, are they? They're from all over the world. They've got lots of different languages, lots of different cultures between them. So it's trying to think, okay, it's a segment, and then the segments within that segment, and how to foster belonging with all of those different groups is a real challenge for sure. There's a really good report, we'll link it afterwards for anyone who hasn't read it, from Pearson and Wonke from February this year, 2021, sorry, February last year. But positively, it shows that international students and postgraduate students on average report slightly more positive feelings about belonging. So those 2 groups in particular report that they struggle less, but it's still something that affects them too. Something that probably will affect all groups of students. It's probably going to affect all of the adults that are on this call today is the cost of living crisis, right? How do you think that this crisis in belonging might be further impacted by the cost of living crisis? Elliot, what do you think?
Oh, nice easy question.
Can you fix it for us, Elliot?
Yeah, sure. I'll just call Liz Truss. I think if we're probably honest, 2nd and 3rd years at the moment are probably going to struggle the most, I would suspect, if they are out in maybe private housing, private accommodation, HMOs, etc. Given how obviously things like maintenance loans haven't really changed, but prices of particularly bills, obviously within first years, if students living in university accommodation, usually bills are included. So actually it might be slightly more an advantage there. So I think there needs to be a genuine conversation, and I've seen people like Jim Dickinson on Wonky having quite a lot of Twitter threads about this type of topic, and there's not really anything coming at the moment particularly from the government. It's not discussed at the Education Select Committee or anything like that. So I think it's probably going to be quite divisive within that, particularly if we're linking back to belonging again. Some students, if they are financially able to get on, might feel slightly more of an advantage than those that can't. And I don't really know what the answer is, other than universities probably putting on spaces to have those conversations and to have those support mechanisms ready to go. It's not going to be a surprise when it comes October, November time. So there is the recently announced financial support being put in place. It'd be interesting to see how that is rolled out to support students. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be particularly. It's more focused on households and maybe businesses, and students always seem left out of that conversation. So the more we can be doing as a sector to kind of, I guess, lobby for students to be supported throughout that, I think is going to be really, really important, particularly those that are working parents as well, or in less financially advantageous situations. We can do all the work we can do in under the sun to kind of support students into higher education, but if they are pushed out because of a cost of living crisis, then it will be an absolute travesty, I think. So as I said, I don't know what the answer is, other than definitely talking about it a lot more over the next few days, weeks to months.
Definitely. The Jim Dickinson thread that you mentioned is a really interesting one. So again, we'll link that for anyone who hasn't seen those, because I think there are 100 suggestions of ways that universities can help. Really, well, seemingly simple things like encouraging that seminar groups don't go to the local prep to talk through their work, because that will exclude some students who can't afford to go to the local prep. I
think just one final thing. I think universities need to be really, really careful not to try and just brush it under the carpet. It is a major issue. So again, we as individual institutions as well as collective institutions need to be talking about it. The worst thing we could do is just brush it under the carpet. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that you think at the moment that will impact second and third year students most acutely. We did some research ourselves back in beginning of September, so only a couple of weeks ago, which was looking at 2023 and 2024 applicants about how they feel about the cost of living. And in total, nearly half, so 47% of those respondents were telling us that they're more likely to change their university plans as a result of cost of living for 2023 and 2024. So either by choosing a university that's much closer to home or living at home and commuting to university. So it's 56% as well. We're looking for cheaper accommodation options. And there's a lot of conversation around, for current students, what's most affordable for them. Is it staying at home or staying in their sort of shared accommodation and heating that, or commuting into the university and paying the cost of travel but being warm in the library, and those shouldn't necessarily be decisions that we expect students to be making at all. Mari, I think you popped your hand up there.
I just want to add a really quick thing before we move on. Black Bullion does a report every year about student money and wellbeing. And in the report, they talk specifically, just to kind of bring it around to belonging specifically, 57% of them said they're worried that 57% said that they feel that worry about finances impacts their mental health. And of those students, 71% said worrying about money negatively, who said that worrying about money negatively impacts their mental health, said that they also have feelings of isolation. So the cost of living crisis has a very direct impact on students' ability to feel like they can belong, to kind of fight against loneliness. So in terms of the really tangible impact on belonging and fighting loneliness, the cost of living crisis is something we definitely, I agree with Elliot, definitely need to be paying attention to when it comes to students and the impacts on their lives.
Yeah, absolutely it does, because you know, even if they've identified clubs or societies that they want to be part of, can they afford to join in? Like, can they afford to buy the branded hoodie and do the field trips and do all the things that will connect them to students with similar shared interests, for sure. So yeah, they are inextricably linked. And Elliot, you're right, you know, we can't push it under the carpet. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left. I believe Zoom unceremoniously boots us out when we get to the full hour. So there are lots of the questions that I want to ask, but I might just skip towards some of the final questions just before we get booted out. What I'd love to know is what initiatives have you seen in the sector? We talked about a few already this morning, but what have you seen that you admire and that you think are good practice? Johnny, you've given some examples from Liverpool, but I guess with your Helloa hat back on, is there anything else that you can kind of share as something that you think is really good to tackle this issue?
With one of those caveats of this is not endorsement as such for these, but it kind of is at the same time. I went to Newcastle Uni. I had a fantastic time, and I worked really closely. I was a graduate ambassador for them for a year as well, and I've seen their partner scheme just go from strength to strength. And I've also seen that many universities have really adopted similar aspects from partners. I can't say that partners would have been the first, I'm not sure, but I know that it was started locally and it went out and further afield, and I see that growing from strength to strength. And I think it's great, just in terms of not just saying here's like a contextual offer, but here's doing something with us and stretching that interaction out, and it's something that's useful even if you don't end up going to that specific university. So, you know, Liverpool have got a scholar scheme, a partner scheme at Newcastle. Many are like, sort of, is it the Head Start or Kickstart scheme at Leicester? Sorry, I can't remember the name. But I think there's also some really bigger sort of national things that are going on. So if people have not involved in sort of Sutton Trust UK summer schools, I think they're absolutely brilliant in terms of their structure. I think one of them is in Kings, and Kings have got just go and check their WP pages out for fantastic things. But you know, K Plus and the Sutton Trust UK summer schools. And lastly, I would say just hats off to UCAS for the development of the hub, because UCAS are a point that everybody kind of, especially those 18-year-olds, they have to go there. And so it's like at the checkout, you know, you're always going to have an interactive point. So there's a key area where you know you're going to have influence over somebody. And the development of the hub with integration of things like UniBuddy and the way that you can, you know, pull together lots of information from lots of places, I think this is really, really positive in helping people make sense of all the information that's out there, but also get a real good handle on what it is that they might be open to as well. But yeah, I mean, hats off across the sector just for opening the transition conversation up. And we've been talking about transitions heavily for 2 or 3 years. There are some fantastic examples from hundreds of universities.
Absolutely, and you've just given some really good examples there, so thank you for that. Now, we did say at the beginning of this that we can't possibly fix things, but I think some of the attendees that have joined us this morning would be really keen to hear if you've got tips, if you've got recommendations that they can kind of take away with them. So, Mari, what would be your top 3 tips for anybody that works with students that wants to better improve that sense of belonging?
Yeah, good question. Be led by students. It's my first tip. Secondly, remember belonging is about students being able to be who they are, not having to fit in. So think about it through that lens rather than through a fitting in lens. And dedicate focus time and resource to understanding what students need and actually implementing what they are telling you they need.
That's great, thank you. Elliot, what would be your top 3?
Good one. I think going back to when we developed Head Start, which was it is institutional campaign to support transition. It was one that took a while to get off the ground, but getting the right people in the room at the start, getting all prospective kind of internal stakeholders in a physical or virtual room at the start to allow them to contribute with the various things that are going on was really advantageous for us. So think of it in that frame of reference as well. Don't be afraid to hear bad news. So particularly we're going back to the being a student-led point. If you're being told by students that they are not feeling a sense of belonging at your university because of XYZ reason, don't just ignore that. Actually harness that and use that to shape what you do next. And I think the third one is probably keep ears to the ground, because as we spoke about earlier, cohorts are going to change rapidly over the next few years as the various different years impacted by COVID has started to think about higher education. I think demand will change as well. So all the figures that UCAS are projecting, there's going to be a lot of people thinking about higher education as well. So that might be something to think about. But yeah, don't just kind of develop one thing and then stick at it and think that'll do. Actually, if it's around the realm of belonging, it'll always need to keep changing. So keep your ears to the ground and use the student sentiment and stuff.
Yeah, lovely little plug. Thank you.
It's generally really helps shape what we do. And I think just the fun thing I was going to mention earlier, actually, just to get it in, is we talked about the helping underrepresented groups. Actually, the introduction of the new WP questions on the UCAS application this year, I think will be a big help with that. I don't know how much we'll be able to do with it this year, but actually with the more data that comes out of those, I think we'll be able to see where other current pinch points might be for certain groups within that as well.
Definitely. And you teed me up kind of nicely for another. I'm going to do a little shameless plug about when you say keep your ears to the ground. You know, that's the student room, right? So using your official rep, making sure that you're involved in the forums and making sure that you're there with the conversations that are happening. Johnny, what's your top 3 tips?
Well, they've kind of already been said, but I've if you imagine that one word is listen, and that's your comma here. So reach out to students and listen. Communicate with as many people internally as you can, then listen to what they're saying and feed it back, and then act on everything that you're hearing, and then crucially make time to listen. We're all trying to do so much at the minute, and it's kind of like, you know, throwing 10 darts at the dartboard while looking in the opposite direction because you're just working on that many things. But actually, if you just take that time to look at the dartboard, your one dart's going to earn you more points. So the key thing here is reach out, listen, act, but then carry on listening constantly. We're all going to get through this and keep developing better things. But it's conversations like this and the insights that we can share that will help us actually have the right impact.
Absolutely, thank you. And then if I can figure out how to share my screen again, I'm just going to quickly wrap us up with this will work. Hopefully. Mari, can I get a nod if you can see the slides again? Good, for you. Just some helpful resources from our friends over at Samaritans and Student Lines as well, for in addition to the great tips that our panelists have shared this morning. These might be some resources that you would find helpful as well. And that's it. That's all, folks. So a really huge thank you from me to our panel of wonderful guests. You've been fantastic. And a huge thank you to everyone who's given up their time to come and join this morning. We went a little bit over and we didn't get booted out. So yeah, we're obviously doing something well. But I really do hope that you found this interesting and useful. So please do reach out afterwards to share any feedback that you've got or ask any questions that we didn't get the chance to do today. And yeah, thank you so much for coming and have a really lovely Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.